Hello, Penny. Welcome to our second episode of the Rise podcast.
Thank you.
So I want to introduce everyone to Penny. Pronounce your last name for me.
Lillitou.
Where's the accent?
In Greek, Lillitou, the first one, the first syllable, Lillitou.
Right, I always say the last name's wrong.
It doesn't matter.
I'm not going to try anymore. I'm just going to tell you to say it. Yes, so you are a speech and language therapist. I think we'll just start all of this by saying a little bit about who you are and what you do. So you are an active member of the Association of Registered Speech Language Pathologists in Cyprus, which I knew that already from personal experience, as well as the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists in the UK.
Yes.
Right. Do you want to add a little bit on to that and tell everyone a little bit about yourself before we get chatting?
Okay, well, I did my course in London, so I was there for 4 years. I spent time in various clinical placements. I worked with children and adults. But I had a tendency to prefer children, so I decided to be a pediatric speech and language therapist. When I graduated, I came back to Cyprus, and I've been working as a private therapist since then. So I see students in my office, in my clinic, and I also collaborate with private schools like yours, so nurseries from the early years, and also primary schools as well. So some mornings I work in primary schools where I see students there, and most sessions are on a one-to-one basis, but I also run group therapy sessions from time to time where children have the opportunity to interact with each other as well. And basically, I work with any difficulty, any disorder that has to do with speech, language, or communication.
Right. Okay. So the reason I wanted to do a podcast with you, and the reason I wanted to do one of the first podcasts with you, oh my God, it's late. The language isn't coming out, is because, first of all, this topic is something I get asked about a lot. It's probably one of the top 5 questions I get asked about when I meet parents, which is my job. That's what I do. So I know that it's a topic people are interested in. People think they know about, which is a good one. People think they know a lot about language and speech. But I think people need to be a bit more informed. And I know from personal experience, because of Theo, my now 10-year-old, since 4 years old, for 2 years he was coming to you, and you were like magic. So if I was going to have this conversation and raise this topic with anyone, it was going to be you, of course. So I wanted, after our conversation pre-podcast, I thought it's a good idea to kickstart this off with to discuss a little bit the difference between language and speech, as you mentioned, which I don't think a lot of people take into consideration and understand that there is a difference between language and speech. So if you want to start by explaining that before we move on, so that it's clearer what we're talking about. So,
of course. Yes, speech and language, they develop at the same time, obviously. So it is good to clarify the difference. So speech has to do with our ability to produce sounds. So how we say what we want to say, really, how we produce the sounds. So it's our ability to use our tongues, our lips, our jaw, our vocal tract to actually make sound and produce it. So it's one way to express language. It's only one way. Language has to do with our ability to pick and choose the right words to say and to actually understand what we hear. And so it's about conveying and understanding the meaning of words. And it could be verbal or non-verbal, so it could be writing, it could be sign language. So there's different modes of language, and speech is only one of them. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So my Theo had a problem with speech. He had a problem with pronouncing sounds.
So the way he articulated specific sounds. So some children can have some difficulties with speech or language, or it could be both.
Right. Okay. Now that we've clarified that, wanted to touch upon a little bit about the milestones that we should expect for children in the early years, because a lot of parents say to me, oh, they're not talking yet, they're panicking, they're 2.5, they're not talking yet. Sometimes they are talking, sometimes they're saying a couple of words, sometimes they're not speaking at all, sometimes they're speaking but they're not speaking clearly. But to parents, it's kind of put under this umbrella term of they're not speaking and there's this panic. So typically, from what you would expect to see, what are the important milestones that us as parents should be looking out for?
Okay, so if you want, I can go sort of in a timeline. So from birth to like 6 months, should we do that? So I just give you main points, I guess. Okay. Yeah. So from birth, even before birth, babies listen. So they are learning language by listening, even from being in the womb. So the first 6 months that you should expect them to react to sound, to be able to calm down or smile when they're spoken to. So just to actually show reaction to sound, because they understand, to recognize their parents, their loved ones, the people they see the most. So you should be able to see a reaction from them. They have different ways of crying to show their needs. They respond to changes in the tone of voice. So that's
not a myth. That's real.
Yeah, that's real. That's why that's real. Tendency, and this is usually natural. When you sound louder or higher intonation, so it's to get their attention, and it works. That's what they react to. So they should react to it at least.
So does a baby can understand the difference between their mum's voice and a stranger's voice?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, I used to love to believe that when my kids were babies, but inside I was like, that's probably not true.
No, of
but
course
it's a nice thing.
They exactly can recognize their mum, and that's why when they're crying or when they're upset, they want their mum, and they recognize the sound of the voice for sure.
That's a
the
nice
moment they're
thing
born,
to
they know
know
who their mum is if they've been hearing their mum, and that's what and we always say, talk to your baby before it's even born. So yeah, of course they understand. They
that's nice. I thought that was a myth. All right.
Yeah, no.
That's a good one.
Around the age like 6 to 12 months, you'll get babbling. So it's when they put two sounds together, like ba ba ba, ma ma ma. And even before that, I went a bit back now. Sorry, like from 4 months they start cooing. So like coo.
So it's the agoo. That we do in Cyprus.
All of these back sounds, and then you get babbling. So putting like syllables, like short syllables together, and it's usually repetitive. So it's ba ba ba, ma ma ma. And they start after like 6 months. Some children start to understand their names. So they start by the age of 1. They can they'll react to the sound of their name. They communicate by using gestures, by waving, by pointing, and they start imitating speech sounds. And by the first birthday, they start having their first words. And usually it's things like mama, like mom, dada, dad, or hi, or cup, or things that are like in their life every day. So the milestone, the first milestone I would say is babbling from about 6 months, and then start moving on to words when they're about 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I noticed with what you just said is, because obviously in our schools we have many mostly international students, and we have mostly children who come here and English isn't their first language, so they're learning English for the first time, and they're starting to use it. And what I found interesting in my experience, because obviously this is not what I I'm not a speech and language therapist. What I found just by observation in my experience since doing this for so many years is that it's really predictable the way that they acquire the language. And the first word that they'll start to use is words that are for necessity or in their immediate environment. So mama, dada, water, the things you just said that they do at one. So it's I guess by what you're saying is that the process of acquiring language from birth would be the same type of process as it would be later on when you're learning a new language, or connected in some way.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yeah, because you start with what you need. And when it's a child, especially when it's a child acquiring a new language, it's a different process than when an adult learns a new language. Yeah, you're right. Very, very good observation.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing every year. So I had to click on it, had to catch on at some point. At what point should so that's language. Speech, again, because I work in early years, I see there's speech discussions a lot.
Yeah.
At what point, and I also lived with my son, do you start to worry about some development areas? So, a lot of children, they can't say the r sound and they say the w, or they what's a very common one, they can't say s, for example, and they'll say th. At what point do you say, at what age would you say, oh, we need to start working on this, we need to look into this?
In terms of speech development, by the age of 3.5, children should be understood by strangers. So not only the people around them, so they should be able to be understood. Most speech sounds emerge by the age of 4. Later on, the last sounds, the hardest sounds is like clarifying between sh, j, je. These come around like 5. By the age of 5, they should be able to differentiate between these. R that you mentioned, the latest studies show that children might acquire it by the age of 6. So typical like r is replaced by w. So rabbit will be wabbit. So the latest research is like even by the age of 6, they're still acquiring it because it's one of the trickiest. And then the last sounds that are acquired is like th and the. These are the trickiest because they're high frequency sounds as well, so you can't really hear them easily. So they are the last sounds that are emerged in English. In Greek, just to add, r is the hardest, and that's by the yeah, it is. It's a trill. It's one of the hardest sounds. But these guidelines, most of the studies that have been done are for children who are learning English as their main language. So we have to give time and we have to adjust when we have children who are learning 2 or 3 languages. But answering your question, when should you be worried? I would say by the age of 4.5, if the child is still really simplifying the language. So are they dropping syllables? So instead of banana, are they saying nana? Instead of car, they're saying ga. Are you hearing? Or yellow lello, things like that. Typical things that you mentioned as well. If they're still doing this by 4.5 years old, it's always good to go to a speech and language therapist just for an assessment. And when that happens, we have to consider the history. So if they're learning other languages, if there's a language delay, so did their first words start to come at the age of 1, or were they late? Did they start talking at the age of 2? So you have to consider all of these factors. And I think that, if I remember correctly, Theo was a bit late to start developing and start having words. Am I right?
Yeah, he had his own language. And he didn't really, but talking about that, it brings me on to the other thing I wanted to ask, which was, I feel, myself included, that sometimes parents are to blame in a way that, and before everyone goes really crazy about what I just said, to explain. So when my Theo had speech delays, I didn't really know it was a speech delay. I just thought it was incredibly cute. So when he was, 2 and he had his own little language, and he was also cute, like he looked cute.
He
So
was,
when
he still is.
he was round and he was just amazing. So when he was speaking in this language of his own, I just thought it was cute. So he was never corrected. I never corrected him. And, he used to call my other son, Nico, he used to call him Tito, Tito. And when Tony because Tony didn't agree with me, he would, say to him, no, say Nico, Nico. And I say, no, don't teach him that, leave him. And I understand now that might have had a lot to do with that. So is that, as parents, should we be helping them get over these phases that we deem cute? Are they not cute? And are they actually, a hindrance to their development?
No, these things it's typical, it's part of typical development, but these processes, simplification processes, if I'm going to call that, because they substitute easier sounds, difficult sounds with easier ones. It's part of the normal development, but after a few months, this has to change. They have to be able to say harder sounds. They have to be able to say longer words. And as parents, the best thing to do is not to pinpoint and correct. So if the child says, oh, it's a spider instead of spider. Don't say spider, it's spider. You can do it in a more fun way. So if the child says it's a spider, you can say, oh, it's a big spider. So you can emphasize the first sound. So it's like correcting, but in indirect way. So you don't put the pressure on them that they've done something wrong. So it's important to speak clearly to the children. I know some they do sound cute, and it is very
cute. So cute.
But when you it's very important to give them the correct model, to give them a good model. And even age when they're about 18 months, 2 years old, when they start to put 2-3 words together. Another good thing is, so if they say if they say car, you can say, oh, it's a big car, or look at the red car. So you can always get what they say, and you can expand it, you can develop it, and you can give them a good model, you can give them a good sentence, and that's how they learn, because it's part of the process. And typically developing children, that's what they need. They need good models. So it's always important to repeat the target correctly and not make the same speech errors that they're making, even though it does sound cute.
Yeah. You mentioned about not correcting them directly. And this does make me think about something else I wanted to bring up today, which is the idea of speech and language issues or delays having an effect on the child's confidence. Because I know that this, in my example, was a huge thing. And I know, we say it's cute and everything, but to be serious about it, I think it is something that not a lot of parents do realize, that their child knows. And I remember when I came to you and we told Theo, look, do you know why you're going to Miss Penny? Right after we left, do you know why you're going to go to Miss Penny? He said, yeah, she's going to help me talk. And I'm so happy.
Aww.
He knew that he had, and he's 4. And I think sometimes we don't realize that it affects them. So I think it is a good point to make to parents, to not kind of point out and say, you're saying it wrong, you should say it like this, and do it in more of a indirect manner, because it can, as I've seen, I don't know if that's the case for everyone, but I do feel it might affect confidence.
Yeah, of course, it does affect, it does. And it's very important. And if you want to pinpoint it, or if you do want to explain to your child, if they're old enough to understand, like if they're 4, you can just put them on the side. It doesn't have to be in front of others, because that will really put them on the spot, and it will make them, most children will feel uncomfortable, or it will affect their confidence. But most of the children I see who are probably 3.5, 4 years old, they do understand, and they do have the awareness, and like the first step that I do in therapy is to actually test their understanding, so the perception of the corrects, the hearing and the discrimination between the sounds. And usually when they're more aware, they know that it's the wrong way they're saying it, but they can't produce the sound, and that's when they need our help.
Yeah. I think also, from what I've understood through conversations with you, is that there is, if I've understood correctly, there is a difference between there being a physical issue with, you know, the oral abilities, and there simply being a habit.
Yes.
Are both as easily treatable?
It really depends on the child. It's much easier to work with a child if they have the ability to produce the sound, because they know where to place the tongue, they know how to make it. So that does make our job a little easier. But if a child comes to me now and they're 5 years old and they have the incorrect storage of the representation of the word, so if they think that yellow is actually lelo, that is harder, because they have learned that this is the correct way to say it and it's actually not, and they've got used to doing it in that way. So they get into a pattern and they just think that's correct. So that's why early intervention is very important. So if you're worried about your child, if you're not sure, it's always better just to get advice. Sometimes it's just a phone call. I speak to a lot of parents just on the phone. I just ask a few questions and then I'm like, okay, if this doesn't change in the next few months, come and see me. So a lot of the time I'm just giving advice on the phone, because there is this, I do feel the last couple of years, there is this tendency, and I feel parents are more stressed about speech and language development. I don't know exactly the reason, but I feel like they get worried easily. There's a higher stress about their speech and language development.
Do you know what I think it might be? And I think it's a reason that there's a lot of stress around a lot of areas. I was having this conversation with somebody about illnesses the other day, and I said, it doesn't seem like we were this stressed about illnesses, 10 years ago when my babies were little, and now everyone's really stressed about it. And the response was yes, because everyone has access to information on social media and on the web, and they think they know everything, and they kind of self-diagnose. And I think it might be the same thing for speech and language. So if somebody Googles, why isn't my child speaking at 2? The first thing that will come up is autism. The same way that if you type pain in my leg, it'll say cancer,
Exactly.
I think this might be a contribution to it.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think it's just best ask, as you're going to ask the doctor, ask a speech therapist on the phone. Yeah. Apparently, it's a phone call.
Sometimes it's just a phone call. It's easy as that. Sometimes it's not, but it's always good to ask if you're not sure. Yeah.
I wanted, while I have you, to debunk a myth.
Okay,
so it's the biggest myth I hear, and what I think is that it's a myth. I could be wrong. So I hear a lot of parents say, my child is learning 2 languages. I speak to him in this language, his father speaks to him in this language, and that's why his speech is delayed and he's not speaking. In my experience, though, I've known 2-year-olds who speak 3 languages and they speak perfectly in all 3 languages. So I'm not convinced that this is actually a thing. So you are going to tell us, is it myth or is it fact?
It is a myth for sure. Bilingualism does not slow down language acquisition. It is not a disorder. It is not a disadvantage. It is the complete opposite. And the research suggests that, and this was from a course I did just a few months ago, that bilingual children usually have better phonological awareness and they learn to read quite easily compared to peers who are only learning 1 language. So it actually, because they are more in tune with the structure, the sound systems of the languages, because they're having to do it both, like for 2 languages, both in the head, research actually suggests that they have like good phonological awareness, and that phonological awareness is the basis for learning to read. So it's definitely a myth, what you said, and being bilingual or trilingual is actually an advantage. But even me growing up being bilingual, this was always the case. So even for me, like on a personal note, because I've always been using 2 languages. I was born in the UK, but then I moved to Cyprus when I was 5, and I went to a Greek public school. So when I was growing up, when I was like a teenager, I always felt like when I was speaking Greek to my peers, I felt, oh, my Greek isn't good enough because I'm also learning English. And then when I spoke to my English friends, I felt, oh, my English isn't as good as this because I'm learning Greek. But it's actually, I'm happy that's not true. I learned it later on when I went to study speech and language therapy, but it's actually an advantage. And just to tell parents that when their children are learning 2 languages, it's very typical, it's very expected for them to mix the languages, even in a sentence. This is called code switching, and it's considered perfectly acceptable and normal. So we shouldn't stop it. And always talking about oral language, not in writing. So if a child is learning 2 languages and their sentence is like 5 words and 2 of them are from like their home language and not English, that's fine. It's because they're choosing the best words in the vocabulary to use in that instant. And it's fine. It's absolutely fine.
Good. So the message is, as many languages as they like, because it's also they're like sponges. So to me, and the advice I always give to parents is, if you're going to teach them anything, do it now when they're young, because as soon as we get to adult age, we become a lot less intelligent, I feel, than children. I think children are a lot more intelligent than us. They can soak up anything and they remember everything, and everything's exciting to them. So it's valuable information. Everything everything in early years should throw anything at them in early years, and they'll keep it.
You're absolutely right. Yes, you're absolutely right. From my professional experience, yes, if your child is developing language and they're fine, throw more languages at them.
Right. So that's debunked.
Yes.
That's the one thing I wanted to clarify.
One thing off the list. Yeah.
Because some people don't believe me. And I'm like, well,
now they will.
Now they will. Right. Well, do you have anything to add on that you feel would be important information for parents to know before we close?
I think what to keep in mind, because we didn't actually go from like birth to like 4 or 5 years in terms of language development, just make sure as parents that you see development in your child. So they should be like from 1 year old when they start the first words. Every check-in, you can keep even a log, a diary. I always tell this to parents if they're worried. Write down new words that they're learning. You should be seeing a growth. If you see things that are stable and they're not learning new words, or they're not putting 2 or 3 words together and they're not moving along to the next stage, then you should give us a call, find a professional, just ask us. So you don't want to see things stable, you want steady progress. That's one thing. And also another thing for parents is try not to compare your child to their peers.
Good one. That's a good one.
Because I know, and I struggled with this as well when I became a mum, because you've got people coming and telling you, oh, she's not walking yet, or she's not doing that yet. But then you have to take a step back and you have to see your child as a whole. I'm sure other skills are emerging faster than others. So always try to compare your child to how your child was 3 months ago or 6 months ago. So compare your child to your child. Try not to get into the hole of comparing your child to the others, because and as adults we learn that we all have different skills, we all like different things, and children are like that too. Not everyone is very artistic, not everyone can speak clearly from the age of 3. Some children can do it, they can produce all the speech sounds from 3.5, 4 years old, and others just take a little bit longer. So give your child time, spend time with them, play with them, and just, you can squeeze in language opportunities in everything, even everyday routines. You're in the car, you're tying your shoelaces. There's so much you can talk about and you're with them. You don't have to plan it, you don't have to structure it. It could be playing a game, follow their lead, get down to their level, use eye contact, and good models. Think of it like nutrition. When you want to give them healthy foods, think of language and nutrition. So give them good models, speak clearly, simple language that they can understand, but always take it to the next step. So expand on what they're saying, give them more information about what's going on around you. Yeah, I think that's it.
I like that piece of advice. That's good advice. So thank you. I love that chat. That was really nice. And personally, it's always nice to catch up with you. I love you bring me nostalgia. Theo when he was young and squidgy.
Yeah, I miss him.
But thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Time.
Thank you. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to email me or call me. I'm happy to share information. I'm always happy to raise awareness about speech and language development. So
I will add your contact details to the description of the video as well, so that anyone can get in touch with you. I will mention, I think there was 2 points in this podcast where the sound broke up a little bit. So if anyone listening to this wants to clarify what was said in those points, it was still audible, but it wasn't, it might not be clear to someone. So if anyone wants to clarify what was said, get in touch with me, get in touch with you, and we can clarify it. No problem. All right. But thank you, Penny. It was a pleasure. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And have a happy new year.
Thank you.
All right. And bye-bye to everyone listening. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.